Hello and welcome to Crisis What Crisis, a new podcast series designed to be a useful field guide as we all try to navigate and come to terms with a dramatically changed world. Whether personal, professional or both, crisis is without doubt the new shared experience. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and inmate of HMP Belmarsh. For the last 4 years I've been trying to put all my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders. And I can tell you that the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success. There are far fewer where you can benefit from the experience of those whose lives have properly unravelled. So in Crisis What Crisis, I'll be talking to the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Some names will be familiar, some less so. But our guests will talk about their experiences honestly, often with humour, but always in the hope that what they have to share might be useful to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Put simply, these are crisis stories worth sharing. If anyone deserves the job title Force of Nature on their CV, then it's my guest today, Baroness Martha Lane Fox. Entrepreneur, investor, crossbench peer, philanthropist and passionate champion of all things digital. Martha also sits on the boards of Twitter, the Donmar Warehouse and Chanel. And last year she was voted the most influential woman in digital for the last 25 years. She's also someone who can talk with more authority than most about how to cope, how to survive when life goes horribly wrong. That moment came in 2004 when Martha was thrown from her open-top Jeep on a Moroccan road. Left fighting for her life, 28 bones broken, including a shattered pelvis, Martha was airlifted back to the UK, where she faced years of surgery and painful recovery. Hers is a story of breathtaking resilience, a true testament to the power and impact of positive thinking in times of crisis. So Martha, thank you so much for joining us today. We're here, of course, to talk about crisis, but if I may, I'd like to start with karaoke, because you are, of course...
Some people would say that my singing was a crisis.
You are, of course, the founder of the brilliant Lucky Voice karaoke business, or as I've come to view it over the years, therapy. Yeah. So are you a believer in the true healing power of a show tune?
I 100% am. And you may even have been part of this, Andy, I'm not sure, but I remember one of the moments that definitely attested to that was when I got a call from the bar team in Soho and the buzz in Soho saying, you won't believe what happened last night. We had the number 10 team in with, I can't remember if it was the Daily Telegraph or the Sun or whatever, and they were singing their hearts out because they've had so many weeks of bad headlines. They thought the only thing to do about it was to have a sing-song. So I don't know whether it actually made a systemic difference, but it did really remind me how everybody feels better when you've had a chance to belt their heart out.
Do you know what? I am responsible for that. and it wasn't with another newspaper. It was with our Lib Dem colleagues, because we'd just gone into coalition. And so as an exercise in bonding, I decided that Lucky Voice was, was the answer for us all. So it was duets between Tories and Lib Dems. Anyway,
did it work?
Well, we got through the first few months, that's for sure. Martha, by your own definition, you had the most wonderful upbringing. I'm curious to know where the ambition and drive came from. And I'm also curious to know where the roots of your resilience, if you like, first started to develop. Because although your parents clearly can take an enormous amount of responsibility, but where are the other clues that when the problems came, that you'd be able to deal with them?
I think it's a couple of things that I feel so very privileged to have had. And the first, as you say, is my parents. And it's probably strange as a 47-year-old woman to go back to your parents, but I don't think it's possible to underestimate how much of an influence they were in sowing the seeds of what I was then, what they thought were important, and therefore the values that I wanted to have in my own life, but also something else, which is about having a broad-ranging world and a hinterland. And although when you're an entrepreneur, you have to be obsessive to a degree, and although, I hope I've shown through my life that I try and always however small, move things forward a tiny bit. I think that coupled with that, one of the things that I have drawn strength on is having a wide network of friends, having a wide-ranging, cultural life, reading, art, music, whatever it might be, travel, all the other things that make life such a rich and varied journey. And that comes 100% from their incredible curiosity about the world and their interests, and showing how important it is to make sure you don't become a one-dimensional person.
Yeah, but the link between resilience and values is an important one.
Yes, I think it is. And I think, you build it. I think this notion, and it's been kind of interesting through this period of time, there's a lot of people obviously wanting some kind of clues about how they might move through this complex moment we're in. And I think that one of the things I come back to is it takes work. It doesn't just happen, right? It might be easy to look at somebody like me or somebody in what feels like a position of fortune or privilege or whatever it might be, and think, well, it's easy for them because blah. But actually, I think resilience takes work, and it's something you have to keep building, and it's like a muscle. You don't just suddenly have it. You have to keep trying to exercise it, and that's partly about values, as you say, but it's also about making sure that you realize that you should test yourself a bit. And it's, if you start to cruise, then you're probably not building that resilience muscle quite as much as you could be.
Yeah. In 1998, of course, you launched with Brent Hoberman lastminute.com, the business that became the sort of darling of the .com boom. That was obviously a terrifically exciting time, but not without its personal challenges, one imagines. I'm talking about the good days of Last Minute. Women are massively underrepresented in the digital sector now. I mean, what was it like for you as a woman in her early 20s in a sector that was so male-dominated?
Yeah. It's with the axis. The reason I'm kind of hesitating is because you're absolutely right. Women in tech, shocking statistics, and unfortunately, 25 years later on, it's still pretty freaking bad. But the other industry in which we operate in, travel, is appalling too. And I remember being in as many meetings, sort of with Lufthansa's management team to try and get them to sell us product, or big hotel chains where there would be no women as much as in technology. So it was pretty brutal. But the strange thing is that I remember moments of thinking, oh my God, did you just ask me that? Or did you just behave like that? Times when venture capitalists asked me or Brent what happens if she gets pregnant, for example, when they were trying to decide whether to give us money or not. And, just blatant sexism in meetings, not talking to me or looking me in the eye. But the truth is that I felt so carried along, both by my working relationship with Brent, which was very equal. He never made me feel as though we were anything other than equal partners, through to the excitement of building the team and the people I was with. So if I'm being really honest with myself, it wasn't the most dominant thing. There were difficult things for sure, but it's more now when I look back on it and I think, oh my Jesus Christ, what on earth was going on? I was really naive in how the dynamics of those markets were working.
Yeah, but naivety can be an incredibly powerful thing, right?
That's definitely true.
It can
Yes.
get you
It can
way.
be, but it can also come back to bite you. So, we very consciously, and it was conscious, I was 25, Brent was 20, nearly 29, 30, loves it when I say that, decided that we were the marketing tools. And not because we thought, oh, here's, a fairly telegenic couple of people who are young, who look like they're doing something interesting and different. It was more because we had no marketing budget at all, and we were quite good salespeople. So we thought every time someone invited us to anything, opening of an envelope, any kind of travel event, any kind of .com thing, we'll go and we'll just bang on about lastminute.com. And because we were excited and we had quite a lot of energy, it was our main marketing tool. And that was great, right? It got us into places we'd never have got into before, because there were not very many people that were like us. Because strange as it seems now, it really wasn't a thing to become an entrepreneur. People thought we were nuts.
Yeah,
and to become an entrepreneur in the tech sector, it's like, what are you smoking? That was insane. Yeah. So we got a lot of attention because of it. But when I look back now, I think I didn't really, again, naivety, of course, didn't think about the consequences of putting yourself out there quite so much. And I was always my authentic self. I don't, I don't have a kind of like a whole load of different things going on where I'm trying to present lots of different Marthas. It was always me. So then it did come back to bite me, and I wish I'd held a bit back, because when you put yourself out there, you take the consequences of that when things don't go quite so well, I guess.
Let's talk about that, because of course it wasn't all up with Last Minute. In the great British tradition of build them up and knock them down, the business became a totem, really, didn't it? When the internet bubble burst and the share price dropped to sort of 30% of its flotation price. The criticism of you, more so than Brent, actually, as I remember it, was pretty acute. Did that feel like a crisis?
Yes, it did. And it felt like a crisis on multiple levels. We had worked really blooming hard, and we hadn't really come up for air. I'd turn up at parties at midnight and see my friends for 15 minutes, or, be constantly thinking about the business, the people in it, the product, whatever it was. And so that was a massive whack round the face of, oh my God, there's a world out there that is really quite unpleasant and has a different view to what we were seeing in our business, which was actually growing as much as it had ever been. So there was that kind of realization of, like, oh my God, we had been very naive. But also there was a really, really deep and unpleasant sexism about the criticism. In as much as Brent and I had our photo taken when we were launching the business, and Brent's picture would be cut out and it looked like I was the founder, which was mortifying for me because it was Brent's idea. When the share price, and I was generous of you to say, lost 30% of its value, I think more like 300% of its value. We went from kind of 55
sorry,
pounds.
two 30% of its value, but I'm obviously wrong. Yeah,
yes, exactly. It was pretty hard because some people had lost some money, although everybody had only invested £135. It was still their money, and needed someone to blame for the fact that the internet market had blown up. And I was that person, because I had, as just mentioned, put myself out there. And, horrible things were written. People wrote that I should be assassinated. Somebody wrote that I shouldn't go out unless I was in a burqa. And it's hard to
these
think
these are members of the public sending you letters.
No, these are journalists writing in respected newspapers. The members of the public writing letters.
The journalist wrote that you should be assassinated.
Yes. And that is pretty, I don't know if that would be published now, actually. I'm not sure people would be able to get away with it. And members of the public, who generally I feel like I'm quite good at getting along with, sent me 3,000 handwritten letters. And let's just say that bitch was one of the nicest sets of letters that I would get.
Right.
And I think a lot about that, because obviously as a board member of Twitter, what would have been unleashed in social media age is quite humbling, I think. And I found that, so sorry to answer back your question, it was a personal crisis because I was overwhelmed by it, and it was unusual, but I didn't know how to navigate this horrible barrage of stuff. And I was uncharacteristically exhausted. I just went to bed, and I never normally do that. It was hard, more importantly, for the people in the company, because a lot of them are young. They'd worked so hard for so little money, and they'd lost all of their stock option value, and the company that they thought was going to be a kind of success was seemingly being knocked apart, even though the business was growing. So, and it was hard because
was there a sense of guilt?
Of course, and responsibility and all those things that I was going to say. And it's not, maybe guilt's too strong a word with the investors, because I think investors are a bit more savvy. But obviously, as a founder who said, charge with me over that cliff, you want to make sure that the people don't actually charge over a cliff. You're going to go onto the sunny incline. So, a long answer. But that was a hard time. It was a really hard time.
Did you think this is not for me?
I don't think I thought that. I don't. That's not necessarily my nature. I tend not to bail on things. I think I thought, what can I try and do to make myself feel better? And subsequently, how can I help to make sure the people that looking to me and Brent for reassurance, inspiration, got that? I think that those were my motivations.
Yeah. So by 2003, you've turned things around again. The business is back on track, and you decide to resign.
Yes.
Was that a tough decision? I mean, had you just grown sick of the public market, the scrutiny, the judgment?
No, it wasn't that. It was, I was 31 when I left lastminute.com in 2004, and it, as I say, it was Brent's idea, and it felt like our shared adventure that we've been on, but it was always different motivation for me than for him, and I didn't want to be defined forever by lastminute.com. And I loved my whole experience there, with chops up and down, but generally, oh my God, what an incredible outlying experience to have by the time you're 31. And I just thought, I want to try some different things. I want to see whether I can actually function in the world beyond this weird, crazy experience. So it was planned. It happened a long period of time. It was hard, of course, but it wasn't impossible. It was right. It felt right.
So Last Minute was sold in 2005, I think, for about 600 million, a great success. But by then, life had become obviously very different for you.
Yes.
On Sunday, May the 2nd, 2004, you're in Morocco with your new boyfriend, Chris, and another friend when on a wet road, your Jeep crashes and you're thrown clear of the car and onto a rock. But in an instant, your life, your life is fundamentally changed. What do you remember now, Martha, about the days immediately after the crash, the days that your doctors and your family feared could be your last?
Well, I don't really remember very much for about the first month, to be honest. I was so sedated, in the first week. Yeah. I had something like 25 operations, and I remember someone telling me that I'd had, over the course of even that first 72 hours, I'd had, I think it was 28 pints of blood. And I only mention that because I think about that a lot, because I can't give blood now because I take too many prescription drugs and they don't like people like me giving blood. But those 28 pints of blood saved my life. Of course, all the amazing doctors and, of course, all the incredible care that I got, being able to get out of Morocco, being able to get to the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. But fundamentally, there's something so insanely humbling for me about knowing that those 28 pints of blood that came from strangers saved my life. So that's what I think about when I think about those first few days, because I can't really remember anything because I was basically anaesthetized.
Do you have much memory of the sort of moments before, if you like, the holiday before the crash?
I remember patches of the morning before. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, so that's something I have to face into. All my godchildren and my new young sons are hysterical about seatbelts now because they've seen the car crash victim scarred up body and they think, oh, quick clunk in. So I guess one good thing came out of it. I don't know, so I can't remember so much before. I remember a little bit about the trip with Chris, who was my new boyfriend, as you said, now my very permanent partner. Yes. So it's patchy, but what I do remember, when I start to remember coming around, it's very strange. I can remember bits of ICU, but I went in and out so much, I'm not quite sure when exactly the timings was, and it's incredible how things go into your conscience. I remember the voice of one of the nurses, the ICU nurses, and I can't remember their face, but I know now that if I heard their voice again, I'd be straight back to that first month, because you hear somebody pottering around about you, adjusting wires, giving you things and so on, and that is such a strong memory. I can hear it very, very clearly still in my head. Quite a strange thing.
Were you in England by that stage? Because you were airlifted out of Morocco to the John Radcliffe in Oxford.
Yes, I was. And again, sometimes I think that perhaps people like me don't often tell the truth about their experience. And the truth of my experience is that the money that I had made or had access to through lastminute.com saved my life. Simple as that. And I think it's quite easy to kind of forget that.
You see it that clearly.
I see it that binarily because it's true, right? Yeah. I was able to get a private medical plane, which is way out of the possibility of most people, to get me out of Morocco within 48 hours. Otherwise, there's absolutely no question. There was nowhere in Morocco that could deal with the scale of injuries that I had faced. And I was able to get not only that, but back to one of the best hospitals in the world for intensive care and orthopedic issues. So, and then I was able to have the system that I was in propped up by extra care and help and all the things, and I still do now. So I really mean that so sincerely, because I think it's important to recognize where you've had that luck and what has enabled your life, and that is definitely one of the things.
Quite often people who've been through crisis will say that they came back better, but you're very honest about the fact that nothing good came from your accident.
And sometimes that's a bit nihilistic. I'm not really a very nihilistic person, but
it's the truth, right? It's in some ways it's the very obvious truth, and yet you were able to maintain an optimistic, to put it mildly, view of the future and of your life. I think people listening to this will be astonished that you did that, but they'll be equally fascinated and intrigued to know how you did it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being generous about how I faced it. It didn't feel like that at the time. You don't really make that choice. You just carry on, right? And I do think that that is one of the things about crisis is you just have to keep going. And you may not know what that one step in front of the next step, which for me was quite literal, will be, but you just keep going. And I think when I said that nothing good came of the accident, I mean that because it still is so profoundly affecting every day. And if I could go back to 1 second before and put my seatbelt on, I would like that. But there's something that happens in parallel, which it doesn't mean that there weren't moments of joy and that I didn't see incredible kind of happiness and that I haven't felt extra dimensions of certain things. So it's hard to explain, but I think that one of the things, and I, alongside the money and my networks of my family and my friends were the other thing that definitely made the difference for me between life and death. I was so lucky that, I was in and out of hospital for 2 years, and then after that for the next kind of 5 years, and I still have these bouts of things happening to me. And yet I never feel alone in them because I'm always surrounded by this incredible web of friends and family. When I was in hospital in those first 2 years, not a day went by that someone didn't come and see me, not one day. And that is just so incredible because, of course, that gives you a belief about the outside world. You have these connections. You feel loved, supported. You feel like that strength to carry on. So you can find that joy and see that joy alongside also wishing that the thing had never happened and that not much good came of it.
There's also a sort of lonely truth to crisis, isn't there? That you can have all those things. And of course, those things can make the difference.
Yeah. Yes.
But in the end, it's you in a bed,
yes.
with a badly damaged body, wondering what on earth is going to happen next.
Yes.
And that's what I mean by the how. Really, what did you do yourself once you were? Well, actually, first of all, I'm intrigued to know, when did you sort of begin to understand? When did you begin to accept what had happened? Because you've also talked about taking ownership of your problem, right? From a business perspective, how did you take ownership of this?
Well, do you know what? I think I do that continually every day. And so I don't know when I go back to the kind of nearly 16, 17 years ago, it sort of feels relevant, but actually it might be more when I find I can express it better is what happened to me, for example, last year, right? So in the end of November, I had a bad fall and I slid straight over on my sacrum, which is not really ever properly mended. Huge amount of nerve pain in my pelvis anyway, and it just exaggerated it to a really hideous degree, and I wasn't really able to move for a couple of months, and I went quite quickly back into quite a dark place, because one of the things that keeps me able to function and keeps my mental health healthy is exercise, even though people would laugh, I'm not very good, but I am quite strong now, and I like walking, and I find the hardest thing is actually just sitting and not moving, and that's when I get stiff and pain and so on.
You box,
so actually
You box, don't you?
I do box, yes. Don't laugh at me. My boxing teacher, Leslie Sacchi.
I'm not laughing. I'm nodding in admiration.
My boxing teacher, Leslie Sacchi, is really a superhero. She's so patient with me, but it's brilliant because I can't feel very well, my legs and feet, and you have to constantly be assessing your proprioception, and that's what's great with boxing. Anyway, and I couldn't box in November or December or January, really. But
so 2 months.
So
2 months.
Yeah, 2 months, and
move.
Actually that felt lonelier because that's from a different point, right? When you're in hospital and you're in a kind of proper crisis that everyone recognizes and people rally round, and it was a thing. But then the moments when you fall back, or I found over the next few years, they are harder because obviously you can't I must have people at my bedside all the time. That's not realistic, and it's not appropriate, and it wouldn't be the right thing at all. But you want to make a crisis out of it. So that's when you have to draw on different strengths, and you have to be more accepting, because I think getting out of hospital or out of that immediate first period of time was about not accepting something. I had to keep going. I had to, of course, rest and pace and do the physio and stuff, but also keep moving and prove I could walk and do all the things that are impossibly hard. Whereas my more recent, when I go backwards now, it's more that I have to find the mental strength to accept that it has happened, to let myself rest, to get better, to not put myself back on a track that means I'm going to fall over and have another injury. And in a way, that's way harder. So I think that my mental resilience around my recent falls and hurts or operations have actually has been harder, because you're drawing on different things, and it's less obvious sometimes. So that's when I have to be much more imaginative. So my own personal strategies are listening to lots of podcasts, reading as much as possible, because sometimes a bit tricky reading because of physical pain, the position I'm in, listening to certain music, finding other things to be able to take your brain out of what you're feeling constricted by. And actually that's harder. That takes harder work.
How do you, I mean, obviously people survive, come through all different types of crisis, but, one might argue that yours is, the toughest because of that constant reminder, the sort of physical reminder of it. Do you allow yourself to sort of, go there, if you like, or is your mechanism to kind of make sure that you stay out of that pit, if you like? Do you ever allow yourself to wallow around?
Denial. Well, crisis is not a competition, right? And I mean that very sincerely. I think, since the accident, people have sometimes found me who've had either accidents themselves or feel like they've got kind of similar physical challenges, and it's never a competition, right? If you're feeling in the depths of something, then you're feeling it. And I think everyone copes with that in different ways. For me, denial is a very, very important part of how I function. And I'm sure that many people would say, well, there's lots about that that's not healthy. My mother might, for example, say, why do you insist on just walking about? And I think she'd quite like me to stay inside, wrapped in cotton wool for the rest of my life. But the way I don't get scared or feel as though I am a fraction of what I was is just by denying that I might fall over, that I've got massive physical challenges, and I just kind of carry on. And it generally works, and then sometimes it doesn't. And
I love that, the strength of denial.
It does.
No,
I know it's not very fashionable to be in denial.
It's powerful.
But I think some things it really is. Things where it's that classic thing of power, accept the things you cannot change, right? It's just some things you have to park because they're not going to change, right? I'm not going to suddenly recover all the things that are wrong with my body, and I'm not going to be what I was before. So just move on and move through it. And I've had this debate quite a lot with both Chris and my best friends, and sometimes it's helpful to go back over things. And, for example, May the 2nd, you mentioned the date of the accident. I do something every year. I like marking it, and that might seem weird and perverse to some people, but for me personally, it's helpful, partly because I like to say thank you to all my friends for helping me get here, and that's a very important thing, partly for my family, my mum, my dad, and so on. But also for me, I like being able to say, okay, by next May the 2nd, I want to try have done. And then
so give me an example.
There's a small one and a big one. So for the 10-year anniversary of the accident, I thought, what shall I do? I know what I'm going to try and do. I want to try and walk 10 miles every day for 5 days. And I'll tell you what, back in 2014, that felt like an impossibility. And my aunt, who I'm very close to, said, let's walk along Hadrian's Wall. So we did. And not just me, but all the people that helped me get out of hospital. So for 3 of the 4 or 5 days, there were 64 of us walking along Hadrian's Wall. And it was really phenomenal. Children of all ages, family, friends. It was amazing. And I thought I'd like to raise some money. And I did. I raised $100,000 for various different charities during my crazy walk. So that was a big example. But this year, because of my slight kind of falling over and accidents, I just wanted to beat my non-stop punching record.
Amazing. And did you?
With Leslie. I think I did sort of beat it. 280 punches in a minute. Thank you very much.
Wow. Tyson Fury, beware.
Yes, well, so yeah, next year, don't laugh. I'm not sure if it's going to happen because of the situation we're in, but the woman who started Spanx' husband seems like a total and complete freak. Jesse Itzler, I think he's called, and he started this thing called Everest 2029. Have you heard about this?
No.
And he's got a mountain in America, and kind of hipsters pay an insane amount of money, that's me, to go up and down it. I think you have to go up and down it 20 times or 19 times, and when you've done that, you've walked Everest.
Wow.
So that's my next challenge. I want to try and climb Everest in those short bursts. How hard can it be?
I was I've seen you speak publicly, and I was also reminded myself by watching a couple of your TED talks and the like. You come on stage you always deliver your speech standing up when sitting down, I assume, is an option. You stand there with your walking stick. You can see, and I'm interested in this from a professional point of view because, as you know, I've spent a bit of time, working with people on their sort of presentation skills. As far as
please give me some feedback.
No.
I want some
This is
useful
my
feedback.
point. No, there's nothing you can learn from me. This is my point. As far as I can see, you never use an auto cue. You rarely tell the same story twice, which of course is the oldest trick.
Well, I'm not sure.
I said rarely. But it's an astonishing feat. It's actually an astonishing feat for anyone, right? But it's an astonishing feat for you, and you choose not to make it any easier for yourself. So what's that all about?
Thank you, but that's what I enjoy doing. So this is not a hardship. I would do it differently if it felt really hard, and I increasingly
it's physically difficult.
It's physically
you can see that it's physically difficult.
It's a bit difficult sometimes, but actually I think it's better to stand up because I feel like you project your voice better. Actually sitting down is probably a bit more tricksy. I'm not sure. That's not naturally where I feel most comfortable. I like feeling upright and then I can move about a bit. So it's not the physicality of it's fine. I definitely reject PowerPoint, auto cue learning. I mean, all that stuff. I think that if you are able to speak with confidence without notes or just with a few mental cues. So I try and anchor my speeches always in groups of 3. I've given away my top secret. So I'll think, okay, I'm going to start 3 chunks and they're going to have 3 segments in them, let's say, and I'll know what those anchor points are and then I'll be able to weave between them. I just think it gives people a much more kind of, I hate that word, relatable, but a kind of relatable experience, and hopefully they feel like the person there is really speaking to them, which I am. So I just enjoy doing it more like that, and I think I've got a bit better at it as I've got older, and I think that if it's a way I can deliver a message that I want to deliver, or a way that I can help inspire a group of people or young women in tech or whatever it might be, then that feels like my job.
Well, it's a job well done. Obviously, life changed again in a wholly positive direction with Felix and Milo. Yes. Children who will not need any lessons in resilience as they
see them sometimes though.
as they get older.
Having my toenails cut, Mama. Like, really?
Not a lot of room for that in your child. Not a lot of room for that in your household, right? You mentioned that you sort of see it as a muscle. That resilience is a muscle that needs training. That's also on one level, an unfashionable view, right? That we should be running away from stress rather than towards it. Have I got that right? Your view is that you need to be in it on occasion, right? To be able to deal with it should things go wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure if stress is the word that I would use, right? I don't think it's just about putting yourself in stressful situations, although that may be part of it. I think it is about making sure you're not being truthful with yourself about when you're hiding from things necessarily and when you're hiding from things unnecessarily. And I still do it with myself, right? It's very easy when you've had a cataclysmically bad accident, which the whole world generally knows about, to say, you know what, I don't want to because I'm in pain. And it's quite easy to say, well, I don't feel in that much pain, but I just don't really want to. And I think I'll use the accident as an excuse. That's really honest. And sometimes I do that and I don't like myself for doing it. So if I feel that and I've got one of the best excuses in the world, then I absolutely know that people must feel that all the time. And therefore, I guess what I mean is everybody deserves to hide sometimes. Of course, that's an important part of human resilience, is knowing to be able to take that strength from being by yourself and just saying, I don't want to do that. No. But I also think it's about being truthful with yourself when you probably could just give yourself that little nudge to try it, to give things a go. And I don't mean a sort of terrible jolly hockey sticks. Come on, let's just carry on. I don't. I mean more considered and intentful than that, because I do think human beings learn by putting themselves in different situations with different groups of people, reading different things, listening to different things, going to different places. All of which sounds remarkably sad now we're stuck in this quarantine period, but we will come back. And so I think, it doesn't need to be stressed, although that might do it too. I just mean being really realistic with yourself when you're hiding from things and when you're when you might be able just to gain a bit of experience, knowledge, show that you can do something by doing something that feels a bit more difficult.
Is ego a factor in crisis?
Mm-hmm. Well, would far be it from me to make any judgment that the countries faring so well in this crisis are the ones led by ginormously autocratic men. Bolsonaro, covering himself in glory, Orban, even Macron, put in that category, unfortunately, and perhaps Boris, and even definitely Trump. I think that, of course, in crisis, it's even more important to be realistic and self-aware, and that's harder if you've got your ego sitting in front of it. It's hard with yourself. It becomes 500 times harder if you're trying to lead a team or a group of people through something. So yes, I'm sure ego is always to do with something, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I've also I know that I probably have an overinflated ego on many levels too, but I do think that you can have confidence and project confidence without having ego with it. And it's important sometimes to separate. Sometimes people want to see that reassurance. They don't want a leader who's just all over the show. It's not you project this kind of, I know what to do, I'll do it in this way. Don't be intransigent. You want to be full of ego, but giving people a sense that you are in this together, you are going to work through it, and it's going to be okay, I think is also important.
I mean, once you move into a political crisis, if you like, or the kind of crisis that we're in at the moment that involves politicians, and ego obviously is going to feature hard. But do you think for an individual crisis that ego can be put to good use? By ego, what I mean is, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person that people think I'm going to end up being. I'm going to actually know I see myself very differently, and I'm going to make sure that that's how the story ends, if you like. Was that a factor for you?
I think that that's a really nice way of expressing it. I'm thinking about it. I often think to myself, be your best self. Try and be your best self. Be somebody that, not quite in the way that you've expressed it, but just I know you can be better than how you're displaying whatever thing you're doing right now. I mean, there's nothing like a pair of 4-year-olds to make you feel like you could be a better version of yourself, frankly. But more than that, I think for me personally, I feel like this very strange combination right now, like I'm sure many people have. It's quite easy to feel as though, okay, I've got this in my very local environment, right? We're talking about this crisis. So check my children are okay, my friends, family network, people that I feel responsible for. You can kind of dig in, and then every now and then I think, but that's not enough for me, and I want to make sure that I have, even in a tiny way, tried to do something that feels a bit more meaningful, because there are so many people who are putting their much more profoundly at risk than all of us sitting around with our computers. So maybe that's a form of ego, I don't know, but I definitely have a voice in my head. I think it's pretty permanent. I hope it's not just in crisis that's thinking, are you doing enough? Are you contributing? Are you being a net positive to things, not a net negative to things?
We're talking about 8 weeks after lockdown was imposed, and as a passionate believer in responsible technology, how are you feeling about the sort of tech consequences? On the one hand, we've seen the kind of digital transformation that you could only have dreamed of when you had the job in government in 2010. Everyone of every generation moving onto their computers and their phones. But on the other side, a real risk that it's opening the door to, autocrats who see it as an opportunity to grab even more power for themselves. A sort of abusive crisis, if you like.
Yeah, it's
how are you feeling about that balance right now?
I think, as you quite rightly say, it is this kind of exponential leap. Someone that's I'm not so much involved in the crazy startup world anymore. I'm really kind of geekily interested in the next wave of digitization of institutions, society, government. And I've really enjoyed thinking about that. And it's been just fascinating how this has been that lever. I mean, to see the cross-bench meeting in the House of Lords all taking place on Zoom. If you'd said that was going to be a possibility a year ago, I'd have been like, no way. But I find that really quite inspiring, because it does just show that there is this amazing capacity for people to want to organise, to get on with stuff. And even when the tools are hard, or even when it's not their natural bent, which, let's be honest, many members of the House of Lords, it might not be the easiest thing for them to do, it's happened. So I find that quite inspiring. And the tech piece is hard. Everyone, the small charity I founded, has been doing this research sporadically every 2 years And 2 years ago, the research we did showed that quite in the thick of the tech clash, everyone loves the internet when it delivers the Amazon package to their front door, but only 12% of people thought it was doing good things for society. Slightly different dynamics now, where even more people think it's doing great things, obviously, because of the pandemic we're in, near 80%. But only 19% of people think that the services are designed with their best interests at heart, so as in us, the users. And that's a bit depressing, isn't it? So with all of that going on with the kind of consumer-facing internet, and then, as you rightly say, these very complex questions emerging about surveillance, data, privacy, what that means for the relationship between state and citizen. But, I take a somewhat unfashionable view of this, perhaps, because yes, it's complicated, but it also doesn't need to be. There is no reason why government technology or technology used by states needs to be nefarious or, have this complexity to it. It can be decentralized, it can be transparent, it can have amazing terms and conditions, it can have very clear sunset clauses, i.e. data stops being used and the thing dies. So it's really important to keep asking those questions, but it is possible to get this stuff right. And I think that we sometimes feels a bit like we're dancing on a pin when we look at the kind of our Western world's considerations about this stuff. When you think about what's happening in China, which is, building a parallel internet, has been surveying basically their population for decades, and will be investing more and more heavily is investing more heavily around the world, will own our networks, all of the stuff. I'm a globalist person. I think we should be open and talk to the Chinese, but, I think we've also got to have the conversations and focus them in the right place.
Very good. Martha, thank you so much for your time and for being so frank with us. Before you go, I want to ask you for your crisis cures. So these are 3 things that you it can't be another human being. I'm sure there's a very long list of human beings, but can't be a human being, but 3 things that you kind of turn to in the tough times.
Yes. And exercise is so fundamental to my mental and physical well-being. It is the difference between a good day and a bad day. And what Leslie, aforementioned amazing boxing teacher, taught me was that she said to me, it doesn't matter. It's now pretty much been scientifically proven that imagining doing the exercise can build the muscle mass. It's quite extraordinary, the relationship between our brain and our muscles.
Sorry, not actually exercising, just imagining the exercise.
If you are
very
somebody
good news.
That does the exercise, I think you maybe have to have done a bit of exercise to be able to pattern it. So when I was not well, when I was laid low again recently, I've thought about the boxing moves, and it does make a difference. So even if I don't feel like I can get out there and move in the same way, I still deeply rely on imagining the exercise if it's not doing it. So exercise is the first thing by quite some distance. The second thing is books and reading. And particularly, I found myself going to poetry in this crisis, partly because, despite what everybody's saying, all this time to do stuff. Yeah, right, there's no time to do anything, but there is time to read a poem for 5 minutes, I have found. So I have been reading a lot of poetry. I've been doing really nice...
is there a particular poem at the moment?
No, but I tell you what, I found 2 poems recently that are just so brilliant for now. One is by a lovely contemporary American poet called Mary Oliver, and it's called Don't Hesitate. And it's about joy and how even when the world is bleak, there's always something awful happening, but it doesn't mean you should begrudge yourself joy. And it's a good poem. I highly recommend that. So poetry particularly. So exercise, even if it's just imagining it, reading poems because they're short. And then, I find very effective a pant disco. Don't know if pant discos happen in the Coulson household, but we have quite a lot of pant discos around here.
They have on occasion.
I'm not allowed them with another person, but I have them by myself too. And I think that, putting on some music, blaring out way too loud, sorry neighbours, and having a couple of minutes of moving about, nothing beats it.
Outstanding. Martha, thanks again so much for your time. Incredibly valuable.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Crisis What Crisis. Do feel free to send us your feedback. You'll find our contact details and our show notes giving you the key insights from our guests at crisiswhatcrisis.com. There are more useful conversations on the way, so please do subscribe. And if you like what you hear, give us a rating and a review. It really helps. Thanks again.